live long and prosper. So in this video series, I'm going to be talking through the social justice elements of every episode of the original series of Star Trek. The thing that inspired this project was actually a Fox News article which argued that Star Trek has in some way betrayed its traditional commitment to sort of political neutrality or middle ground by embracing progressive politics. In this series, we're going to see that Star Trek has always embraced progressive politics, and it's always been aspirational for social justice in various senses. I am taking a broad perspective on social justice here, so that may include multiple different types of social justice, whether that's racial, whether that's economic, whether that's religious, whether that's abilities, gender and sexuality, anything broadly considered. I will go through every episode. Some of the episodes I will interview fellow Trekkies and talk with them about it. And then below, in the descriptions, I will give you additional information about the episodes, particularly their original air date, who wrote the screenplay, and who directed that episode. I also want to dedicate this series to my dad, Michael Allen Zapkin. He was an OG Trekkie from back in the day, and it was watching the original series with him that I came to love Star Trek. In this video, we're going to talk about the Lights of Zetar. So, in this episode, Lieutenant Mira Romaine is our special guest. She is being taken to Memory Alpha, which is kind of library planet that contains copies of all of the knowledge of all Federation planets. While they are on the way to Memory Alpha, the Enterprise encounters what they first believe to be a storm, but Spock quickly determines it is not a storm because it moves in purposeful directions toward particular targets, the first target being the Enterprise. So it goes to the Enterprise, paralyzes different portions of different crew people's brains, whether that's the speech center, whether that's hands, whether that's eyes, whatever it is. Lieutenant Romaine, the storm is flickering lights of different colors. That they get some nice special effects that like zooms down and just boom into her eye, and we get a close-up of her eye with the lights of this storm in it. He then passes out. He's the only crew person who passes out on the entire ship, and so McCoy wants to do medical tests, as you do when you have an anomaly like that. Lieutenant Romaine is not super keen on having these medical tests done. He's kind of resistant. But Scotty, who's got a huge crush on her, basically comes down and is like, "Oh, it's fine, the wee lassie didn't understand." And it's super patronizing. Like he's clearly not trying to be a dick to her, but he's kind of a dick to her. Though McCoy is doing the same thing. They're both really just like patronizing her and being like, because McCoy is like, if you want a career in Starfleet, you gotta learn discipline. And all that. That was a terrible McCoy impression, by the way. I apologize for that. But this is the kind of thing. So, like, this is what's going on. Lieutenant Romaine starts having these sort of premonitions, these visions of things that she doesn't yet know are going to happen. Meanwhile, the storm has headed toward Memory Alpha, surrounded the planetoid, destroyed the computer core, basically destroying much of the knowledge of the Federation. This is like a destruction of an ancient royal library type moment. There wasn't really a burning of the Library of Alexandria, even though a lot of people think that there was. It was sort of destroyed in phases over time. But the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, the great library, the royal library at Nineveh, things like this, that contained massive amounts of ancient documents or wisdom, which is then lost, or at least temporarily lost, since the great library at Nineveh was partially recovered. Anyway, irrelevant. The library at Memory Alpha is largely devastated, and all of the scholars, researchers, scientists, whatever, who were working at Memory Alpha at the time, who were doing their research, gathering their knowledge, they're all killed. Lieutenant Romaine had a premonition where she saw in the exact position that some of those dead bodies would be, those dead bodies before they died. So this is all raising a lot of questions about what in the fuck is going on here. Lieutenant Romaine does not know, but they have a hearing in which Kirk chairs. McCoy is there basically being like, here's all the stuff that we know about what's going on with Lieutenant Romaine. Spock is there being like, here's all the stuff we know about what's going on with this storm. And Scotty is there to be like, hey, Mira Romaine, I'm your emotional support engineer. He's basically there to try and make her more comfortable so that they can actually get something productive out of this. Now, at one point, McCoy is like, yeah, we ran an EEG, an electroencephalogram. I don't know from medicine, but it's basically, it maps brainwaves, as I understand it. We ran the EEG prior. Starfleet just had those records. They have everybody's brainwaves on file, which I guess is useful info, because it does come up at least one other time. And then we ran an EEG on her after she got stormed and passed out. Her brainwaves are not the same. McCoy shows a slide of the new brainwaves, and Spock is like, are you sure that's the right slide? Because that's exactly the same as the pattern of the storm. So what it turns out is that the storm is actually the sort of disembodied consciousness of the last survivors of the race of Zetar. They had evolved beyond physical bodies, and their species was dying, and so the last 100 or so of them like detached their consciousness or their will to live or something like that from their physical bodies and just drifted across space looking for a being that they could inhabit. For some reason, due to her random genetic, biological, whatever makeup, Lieutenant Romaine is a suitable host. So the Zetarians want to basically take her body and use that as their home to live out their lives. Kirk, as is always the case when entities are like, we just want this one body, it's no big deal. It's like, actually, this is a big deal. You can't have that body because somebody is already using that body. The Zetarians are like, well, don't care. We're going to take it. And Mira Romaine has like a battle of wills where she has to try and resist the Zetarians. She is losing, but she holds on well enough that they can get her into an atmospheric pressure chamber and basically start like increase, like they put her in zero gravity, so she's floating, and then they increase the atmospheric pressures on her, with the thought being that this will drive out and destroy the Zetarians, but they can do it in a controlled way to try and prevent Lieutenant Romaine from actually being permanently injured. I don't think that would actually physically work, but again, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. Also, this is Star Trek technology, so I don't know that this machine even exists in any meaningful way, particularly not in 1969 when this episode comes out. So that's what's going on. That's the episode. Now, I think there's a couple of things that are interesting. One is Scotty and McCoy, and to a lesser extent Kirk, are so fucking patronizing toward Lieutenant Romaine. And part of that is that this is her first space mission. She is inexperienced, and so Scotty actually puts down to sort of space sickness, basically like to inexperience in space. He attributes a lot of her symptoms to that, rather than realizing that there is something actually wrong with her. That's an important point. I'm going to come back to that. But Scotty is so fucking patronizing. Like, again, when McCoy is questioning her and she's like, I don't see the need for a medical assessment of me. I feel fine. And she clearly understands what's going on, and she does not want to cooperate. And Scotty's like, again, like, oh, the poor wee lass, she fell down, she just doesn't understand. It's like, she clearly fucking does understand. She's an adult person. She's a member of Starfleet. She's clearly educated and trained and qualified to do this thing. And yet Scotty is making these like weird excuses for her as though she's barely functional or rational. So there's that element of it. What was I going to come back to? There was a thing that I had just said a few minutes ago we were going to come back to. I'll come back to it when I remember it. So the other element of this that I think is interesting is the Zetarians. And again, this is a thing that we have seen before in different episodes, where entities, typically disembodied entities, non-corporeal entities, want to appropriate the physical bodies of members of the Enterprise crew in order to live out their lives again as corporeal beings. We have here an interesting, I think, element of reproductive rights, right? Because there is obviously not all people who get pregnant feel this way, but there is an argument to be made, particularly by those who do not want to carry a pregnancy to term, that this is a life form that is feeding off of them and utilizing their body without necessarily having their consent. So we've got that element of it. And again, there is a kind of absolutist perspective in Star Trek's treatment of bodily autonomy in these instances, that it does not, the fact that the Zetarians will die if they do not have a physical body, they will die at some point if they do not have a physical body to live out their lives, does not give them the right to take Mira Romaine's body, particularly if that means dispossessing her. And given the still relatively high rates of maternal mortality, that's not an unrealistic fear with pregnancy. That being said, I can't remember what the thing was that I had said I was going to come back to, so I'm not going to come back to it. Sorry.